So as mentioned, I'm Jake Laroque, and I'm part of our Insights team here at LinkedIn. And in the spirit of sharing something about myself that's not on my profile, I'll actually give you two things. Both are slightly embarrassing, but in completely different ways. The first is I have a rather unhealthy obsession with shoes. And I actually have more pairs of shoes than any man or woman I've ever met in person. I believe that there are people out there that have more shoes than me, but I just haven't met them yet. And the second sort of slightly embarrassing thing, but actually more relevant to the topic at hand today, is that I'm actually pretty obsessed also with technology. And when it comes to actually consumer technology in particular, I tend to be an early adopter. And so if you've seen a guy walking around today wearing a pair of Google Glass, that was actually me. So that glass hole bothering people, that was me. Great. And shortly, I'll bring up Roslyn Ku. And together, we're going to share with you some insights from some new research around, oops, there we go, the social bridge to the IT committee, and how you can leverage content on social media to better connect and build relationships with the IT buyer. And Roslyn, when I do bring you up, don't worry, I'm not going to make you share anything. That was just a LinkedIn tradition.
Thank you.
All right. Great. So we all know that when it comes to the purchase process, the buyer is in control. Digital media, social media gives them instant access to information and peer validation at scale. And they're self-diagnosing their solutions. So it comes as no surprise that they're 60% of the way through their decision journey before they reach out to a brand. And that's what we want to address here today. How can you, as marketers and brands, get in front of them and influence them before they're ready to have a conversation with the tech vendor? Oops. There we go. Because the danger of not getting in front of them earlier in the process means you risk being on the sideline. And the consequences of being on the sideline mean you'll have less exposure to potential products. There'll be a decrease in lead potential, and you risk them viewing you not as a trusted partner. But the good news is, social media can help bridge the gap and help you build those relationships. So the question is, why is it so critical to foster long-term relationships? Well, there's a scarcity of people that influence tech purchasing. According to comScore, there are 15 million people in the US that were involved in the purchase decision for technology at their company. And according to Forrester, they're influencing $820 billion in IT spend this year. Now, on the surface of it, that seems like a fairly sizable number, but think about all of the marketing that you're doing. Think about all of the people that you're reaching and all of the different messaging that they're getting. And now think about it, what it must be like from their perspective, how easily they might get annoyed by poorly placed marketing. And you've all seen this stat, or at least something similar, and that it's 5 times more expensive for you to gain a new customer than it is to retain an existing one. And if you're just churning and burning and not thinking about developing a long-term relationship, your potential client pool gets even smaller and smaller as you begin to alienate them. And I actually want to pause here for a second, because I got a chance to talk to a number of you this morning and throughout the day. Sometimes it was about Google Glass, but sometimes it was about actually the strategy and the pain points that you're feeling as marketers. And I actually also got to ask some of you the question about whether or not you yourself have ever influenced a tech purchase at your company. And most of the people that I asked the question to said yes. You made strong hardware recommendations. You made software recommendations that were eventually implemented in your group, in your division, or in your enterprise. And this is sort of bad networking, I suppose, on my part, but I didn't actually inquire whether or not you worked within your IT group. So let me correct that right now. With a show of hands, who here works within their IT group? Who's in the IT department? So interesting. A lot of the people I talk to influence tech purchases and yet nobody raised their hand as actually being part of the IT department. And as we traditionally think about this audience, you might think of them as being within IT. That's the general targeting. Or you might think of them as being the senior-most decision makers at their company, typically the C-suite. But what our research is showing that this committee of IT influencers extends beyond IT. And in fact, 43% of them work outside of IT. And they work in departments like finance and sales, and like many of you, they work in marketing. But unlike you, they're not all the most senior people. Half of them told us that they are an individual contributor or a manager. So as marketers, I challenge you to think holistically about all the different people that might be involved within a tech purchase for a company, because there's a pretty broad spectrum of positions and seniority that make up this IT committee. Now, to do this research, we had some really great partnerships. So to understand what they were thinking, we partnered with comScore, a leader in digital measurement with expertise in the tech space, and they conducted a survey in the US on our behalf. And the people who took the survey didn't know that LinkedIn sponsored it, nor did they even have to use social media to participate. So it's meant to represent the broader IT committee across the US. Now, to listen to what they were saying, we partnered with Starcom MediaVest Group and Mashwork. SMG, as you're all aware, is one of the top agencies in the world, and Mashwork is a social media insights firm that uses text analytics to listen to the tech conversations that these groups are having on the social web. And finally, us being LinkedIn, we looked within our own data to understand what they were doing and the type of content they were engaging with on our own platform. So as we take you through the rest of the results, I want you to listen in for 3 things, because these are 3 of the key takeaways that we want you to walk away with today. First, social media is not just for connecting with peers. Obviously, that's a hugely important component to it. But what you're going to hear is that, and what you've heard throughout the day, is that the IT committee wants to hear from you. They're open, receptive, and they expect you to be part of that conversation. Second, you all understand how important it is for you to make that short list. But we're going to provide further information to help underscore how critical that is and how exclusive that group can be. And then finally, you can make the short list by both fostering long-term relationships, but also still serving your short-term needs via lead generation. And with that, let me turn it over to Roslyn to start taking us through the findings.
Thank you, Jake. And since I know Jake, so you know I do not have as many shoes as he does. So let's deep dive into the first point that Jake just mentioned, which is the IT committee actively seeks conversation with vendors on social. Why do we see that? We actually see that very clear in the survey result. Nearly all the IT committee uses social network for business purpose, not just for connecting with their peers, their friends, and family. This number was actually fairly high even back last year, 85%. But this year, the IT committee that we surveyed tell us that 95% of them actually use social network for business purposes. This really means that social network right now is a de facto platform for all the IT committee members. They really rely on social to understand things that's related to their business. And all the things you just heard earlier really demonstrate how LinkedIn is trying to make the platform really useful for all the business people for business purpose as well. And we know that the survey is blind, so everybody here who use LinkedIn and work for LinkedIn should have a pat on their back, because what we found is among all social network platforms that's included in the survey, LinkedIn actually leads in terms of percentage of all the IT committee use LinkedIn for business purpose. So we definitely come to the right place to look for our potential clients. So why does social become a de facto platform for the IT committee? It is because of Terra. Trust, efficiency, relevancy, and access. When it comes to make a business purchase decision, particularly an IT purchase decision, the IT committee comes to social network because there's a group of trusted peers in their network. They can find information very efficiently. And social really provide this relevant network and context for them to connect with their vendors, connect with their peers. And the social network itself, because it's so broad, really give them a wide access to the people they need to talk to. So they leverage the platform to consume and study content. So during their decision purchase process, what they're doing is they're really understanding, they're debating, they're investigating, and they're making their IT decision. You'll see that these engagement levels are really high. What we also found is these look like across all different steps of the engagement, social network is really leveraged across the board. So Terra is really driving the utilization across every single step of the decision-making process. That starts from generating awareness and find out what's out there, what solution is useful for them, to really scoping their business needs, planning their entire project, all the way through to selecting a single vendor from the shortlist that we're going to talk about later, and with implementing the solution, and probably even later on, supporting the usage of their product. You agree all these numbers are high, it's close to 70% or even higher. What we found really is the number actually has been growing since last year. And we really do expect the trend to continue. So you can really bank your money that social network is becoming just more and more important. So I'm sure, given that who you are and which conference we're attending, like 100% of us are somehow connected on social with our friends, colleagues, and peers. So what the survey really tells us is you really shouldn't just use social to connect with people that you already know. This really hard to reach IT committee audience are on social, and they actually expect and open to be connected with new people. 2/3 of them told us that they're very open to connect with new vendor on social. Even more of them, like 3/4 of them, are very open to have a conversation with a new vendor on social. We talk about using really valuable content to generate conversation. They're really ready to be engaged with every one of us. So because now everybody knows this knowledge, we're going to widely distribute this, then you're just going to know your competitors are going to link with your potential client on social. So if we decide that we're not going to leverage this platform, we're not going to be engaging with our clients on social, what we're really missing is just fabulous opportunity to build a long-term relationship, cement our current relationship with the client we definitely need that relationship with. So just how important is that relationship? Jake mentioned the second point, which is the vendor shortlist is actually a lot more exclusive and critical than we might think. Why are we saying that? The IT committee actually already knows and have a really good idea what they want to work with by the time they come to the vendor selection process. So if you don't have the relationship that's really strong with them, you're not going to be top of mind. They're very unlikely to actually put you in that shortlist. So what we found from the survey that we just conducted this quarter is when you talk about the shortlist, the list is very exclusive. On average, only 3 vendors on that shortlist in the vendor selection process. And the IT committee actually want to work with who they already know because 92% purchase actually from that shortlist of vendors. And if you never work with them, the chance of you actually winning something is fairly slim. Because among all the purchases, only 1 in 6 purchase from a new vendor. So you know how critical this list is. So you really need it to actually make to the shortlist. I know there are probably quite a few of you who work in very large enterprises or work in fabulous firms in the niche, that you tend to make the shortlist. But building the relationship is still very critical because you really want to strengthen your position on the shortlist. And you also in the future see the incumbent. So everything that we're talking about today really helps regardless whether you consistently make the shortlist or not. So now we know just how hesitant the IT committee member was working with new vendors. How do you actually make yourself get into that shortlist? It's not going to be an easy task. But you come here, and we're going to definitely help you out to get to the shortlist. So in order to really understand why the IT committee members don't want to connect with new vendors on social in order to help you make the shortlist, we actually asked them in the survey the ways why they're hesitant to connect with new vendors on social network. What we found out, the first reason, the most important reason, is they don't want to receive a lot of marketing materials. Essentially, what they're telling us is they don't want just to be sold to. Instead, they really wanted to engage in an authentic conversation. We heard about that. Through the conversation, we also learned from our keynote speaker that we can actually bring them to become our advocate and also potentially collaborate. And this is further strengthened by other top reasons why the vendors are hesitant, why the IT committee hesitate to connect with the vendors that they don't know. Here are some reasons. They don't believe new vendors will give them credible information. They don't think the new vendors are thought leaders in the category. They don't believe the new vendors will provide relevant information for their specific job. And they're really afraid the new vendors is going to talk way too much about themselves. So knowing what they're afraid of, we should really adopt our marketing strategy on social to slightly step away from the old ways that we're doing things, such as getting the content behind the lead form we just heard about. You really want to provide valuable content that can spark a conversation, can really make your client think that it's credible, you demonstrate your thought leadership, and it's relevant to their job, and step away from talking about yourself all the time. This means when it comes to content that really build relationship, that's what you really want in order to get down that short list, it's critical that the content be authentic, valuable to what their current need was, and also delivered in a very timely way. So in order to really make sure we loop and complete the entire story, we did ask in the survey what the interested topics are the IT committee have in terms of throughout the decision-making process. Clearly, because we're talking about this long step, we did get a variety of topics that's included in terms of the interest level. We can see that at the beginning of each project, the interests tend to be at the macro level. As the process goes on, the interests become more specific. Hi, Jake. So I'm going to turn back to Jake to give you a more specific example on the content.
Right. So when we partnered with Mashword to conduct this listening exercise, one of the things that we wanted to get out of it was a full understanding of the types of conversations and the content they were engaging with. And what we learned was it wasn't all technical. They had a pretty diverse set of needs, and there's an opportunity for brands to enter into the conversation and cover off on those topics in a way that isn't focused just on themselves. So let's go through some examples of content that we've seen generate some level of engagement. And so as Roslyn alluded to, when they start their decision journey, the content that they're looking for, the information they want, tends to be at a higher, more macro level. They're looking for news and information. But what we learned was it wasn't always about product. there's just a ton of aspirational content, leadership content, and functional role content that they engage with that you need to start considering all of that in your strategy. And so who here, again, hopefully I'll get more hand raisers, who here either currently uses Salesforce.com or has used Salesforce in a previous life? Okay, now that seems to be most of the room. And if you're a Salesforce client or considering using them, you're going to want to know who they've acquired. You want to stay on top of the announcements they're making because that's going to make you help you make a purchase decision. And when this article was shared on LinkedIn, we looked at IT decision makers, and over 3,200 engaged with it in the month of June. Now, that's not the number of people that saw this article. These are people that engaged. They liked, they shared, and they commented on it. And what we also learned when Mashwork looked at the data was that senior decision makers were twice as likely to have shared product and industry information. And if we dig into that a little bit deeper, oh, actually, let me pause there. In this case, by senior decision makers, I mean those who self-identify as being a director level or higher. And the comparison is against those at a manager level or below. And so when we dig into this a little bit deeper, we're also seeing some other subtle differences between seniority level. While they're both engaging with this high-level content up front, junior decision makers do tend to talk about products more. You can see here a tweet from somebody who's talking about the imminent release of Windows 8. And on the right, you see someone mentioning that Asian companies are starting to adopt e-learning. So it's an example of a post that's somewhat of a more macro or industry level. And similarly, senior decision makers were 11.5 times more engaged with thought leadership. Now, I'm not going to belabor the point. We had some great influencers up here, but our influencer program is a way that our members are consuming and engaging with thought leadership. And when trying to figure out what example I wanted to show, I didn't want to pick one of the influencers that we had here. I didn't want to alienate the others. So what I did was I picked a different example. This is one from the CEO of GE about using big data to drive efficiency. And when I looked at this post, over 1,300 IT decision makers engaged within June. What I found also interesting about that is if you look at the comments, earlier we talked about how rich and how good the conversation is. When you look at the comments, half of the comments that were made about this post generated their own engagement, meaning they were also liked or people commented on another poster's comments. So people are learning and engaging from Jeff, but they're also talking amongst themselves and learning from each other. And as they move towards the end of their decision journey, their needs shift. Their needs become more tactical, more technical, and they're looking for best practice content to help them implement or troubleshoot. And it's at this point where junior decision makers then become more engaged with content. And this here is just an example of somebody sharing an article around leveraging analytics within the telecom space. And now the IT committee, they're busy, they have difficult jobs. So anything that you can do as brands to provide them content that meets all of the diverse needs will have so much more of an impact. You'll have such a big advantage over brands that are only talking about themselves. So now let's talk about how to build those relationships to make the shortlist. Traditional lead generation, cold calling, gating content behind a lead form. Those are and should continue to be very important ways for you to generate leads. But when you do it on social, you have to think slightly differently. At its core, social is about open discussion. It's about open information. And you need to, I'm not saying that you can't block content behind a gate. But again, you have to do it in such a way that you're not taking away the inherent value that social provides to these members. Right? So even if you've got a lot of great content, if you're blocking it and every single time someone wants to try to consume something from you, they have to fill out a lead form, you're going to damage your brand, and they're going to turn away from you. But if you're continuing a conversation and occasionally ask for that lead, you've earned it because you've provided them with value first. And that's where you want to be. That's the sweet spot. Because you've identified them when they're at the process where they've raised their hand and said, yes, I'm ready to talk to you now. And in this case, a trusted context really does matter. So within the survey, we asked them to compare LinkedIn versus other websites. Not just other social networks, but asked them to think about how much they trust LinkedIn more versus other websites in general. And what we heard is that twice as many of the IT committee trust LinkedIn more when it comes to connecting with their vendors, when it comes to talking about their vendor experiences, and when it comes to receiving information that's relevant for their IT decisions. And that trust will lead to engagement. We also asked them how they have connected with their vendor on LinkedIn versus how they've connected with their vendor on other social networks. And we're seeing much higher engagement. LinkedIn is used 56% more often to read a post from a vendor. And LinkedIn is used 50% more often to follow that vendor. So trust leads to engagement, and this broad reach that you create will ultimately lead you to higher consideration. Now, there's a lot to digest on this slide, so I'm gonna break it down, so just stay with me. We wanted to get a full picture of how they engage with a vendor before they purchase. And so what's represented along the bottom are the different types of ways they could have engaged with a vendor on LinkedIn. So you've got one group that told us, nope, I didn't engage with LinkedIn at all with that vendor before I made the purchase. You've got another group that said, yeah, I engaged with LinkedIn, or with the vendor on LinkedIn, but only in one way. I might have joined a group discussion. I might have followed the vendor. I might have read a post, but I only engaged with the vendor on LinkedIn in one way. Then we've got another group who told us, yeah, I engaged with that vendor, and I did it in 2 or more ways on LinkedIn. But we're also interested in how they might have contacted the vendor directly, or how the vendor might have contacted them directly. And so we asked them, again, before purchase, did you meet with the vendor in person? Did you get a demo? Did you attend a webinar, or did you do a live chat with this vendor? And what you're seeing here is a strong positive correlation between engagement on LinkedIn and access to the IT committee. I'm seeing a few blank stares. I'm hoping it's that after lunch sort of lull and not my delivery. But so let me take a step back and let me rephrase this. Your chances of getting a meeting with the IT committee increases as you engage them on LinkedIn. And so sticking with that same framework of grouping the IT committee into 3 different buckets of they didn't engage with the vendor on LinkedIn at all, they did it 1 or 2 or more ways. As engagement increases, we're seeing an increase of the number of brand promoters that are created. And so for those who aren't familiar with Net Promoter Score or have heard of NPS but are not sure, don't recall, let me do just a quick refresher. Net Promoter Score is based off of the question, how likely would you be to recommend a brand? And companies use it to get an idea of how many promoters and detractors that they have. And it paints a pretty clear picture of how they're viewed from their customers' eyes. So as that number gets bigger and bigger and closer to 100, the more likely that brand is to have people who will come back and buy from them again, but will also urge their friends and their colleagues to buy from you too. So again, as you see here, as vendors interact with the IT committee on LinkedIn, they're more likely to create high brand promoters. And so now, how should you engage with them on LinkedIn? Where should you actually be? Well, there's 4 places where you need to be to get into that conversation. You need to be in the news feed. You need to be in groups. You need to create customized communication, personal communication via InMail. And you need to be on mobile. And as David had alluded to earlier, as we think about products, we think about obviously creating a good member experience, but we also think about products that we can create to allow you to get into the conversation in a more authentic and meaningful way. Because our product strategy and vision isn't solely about monetizing the platform. One of our core values is our belief that our members come first. And when we look at our members, we know where they are on the platform, we know the ways in which they want to be engaged with, and we know the insight and the content that resonates and what they're looking for. And it's that, above a lot of all other things, that helps drive our product strategy. And so what you see behind me are some examples of ways in which you can get into the news feed that help you with groups and help you create personalized experiences for your core audience. That was a lot of information, I know. So let me just take a big step back, and let's sort of talk about what the overarching takeaways that you should be considering and taking into account as you go into Q4, as you plan for 2014, that should help you with your strategy. First, go beyond IT. If you stick with your traditional definitions, you're missing a huge opportunity to reach these critical groups of people that influence tech decisions at their company. And LinkedIn does have an IT committee segment ready for you today. Ensure your content is authentic, valuable, and timely. And given how diverse the functional roles and the seniority is within the IT committee, make sure that your content reflects all their diverse needs. Start to earn leads in addition to the ways you're generating leads now. But remember to do it slightly differently, because on social, they abhor a party crasher. So become an invited guest by providing content that helps them first, but talks about your brand second. Now, focus on building your relationships to get on that short list. And for those of you who constantly are making the short list, you strengthen your relationships to fortify your position against competitors and unseat the incumbent. And I mentioned at the top of this that I'm part of our insights team. And because we're so focused on data and analytics, one of our mantras is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so, given the critical importance of making the short list, begin tracking that as a new KPI. So please keep in mind all of these takeaways and themes as you think about your content strategy, as you think about your social strategy, because the IT committee, that group of people that's waiting to hear from you on social, they will develop the trust and advocacy for your brand that's so important in today's digital age. Thank you.
Any questions from the survey itself, other related work that's included in this presentation?
Oh, we got it. Mike, come on.
Ann Sun from Cisco. Thanks for sharing the great research with us. I was curious whether you conducted this research outside of the US, and if so, were there similar findings? How did they vary?
Yes, so great question. We did conduct it in the US. Today, we wanted to represent the US, but we did this globally in 10 countries. So US, Canada, UK, France, Germany, Australia, India, Brazil, Hong Kong, Singapore. So we are rolling this out to other regions, but today was purely US focus. Now, to your question about where we're seeing differences, we're not ready to talk about that yet because we haven't released the information in other places. But I will say that when you saw the chart earlier that showed the differences in the type of content they're looking for. So not what they're looking for on social, but what they're looking for in general. So at the beginning, it was about more macro level information that got towards the end sort of more micro tactical. I can say that we saw a lot of differences there within country. So some countries were looking for industry news up front. Some continue to look through that all through the process. So yes, we did see differences. I would say overall, it reflected what we saw in the US with just some subtle nuances country by country.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Alex Wong from Symantec. This is actually really great information and pretty exciting stuff to learn about the tech industry as a whole. We focus, of course, at a much granular stage with the different IT companies that we work with. I'm curious if you guys have information, at that level of detail where we break down further. I don't know if you guys do like a trends report or if you share statistics, because it sounds like you guys would be the best source of information of how some of these IT professionals work.
Well, within the context of this, I think this is the extent that we're sharing publicly now. I don't know if comScore has any syndicated reports that talk about that, but I mean, happy to talk about this in more detail. But in terms of like what we're releasing, it's represented here.
In terms of if you're interested, the reason that comScore could actually project a number of IT purchasers is there are actually syndicated resources that comScore has where you can actually understand what the IT decision makers are doing online, where they're consuming content. LinkedIn obviously has tremendous resources as what they're doing on LinkedIn. And so with that segment available, you can really go target them.
Okay, we're calling time. So thanks, everybody, again.
We'll be later on at the reception. Come over with questions.